in its time. He has also set eternity in the hearts of men, yet they cannot fathom what God has done from beginning to end. I know that there is nothing better for men than to be happy and do good while they live, that everyone may eat and drink and find satisfaction in all his toil. This is the gift of God. I know that everything God does will endure forever. Nothing can be added to it, and nothing taken from it. God does it so that men will revere him. Whatever is has already been, and what will be has been before, and God will call the past to account. And I saw something else under the sun. In the place of judgment, wickedness was there. In the place of justice, wickedness was there. I thought in my heart, God will bring to judgment both the righteous and the wicked, for there will be a time for every activity, a time for every deed. I also thought, as for men, God tests them so that they may see that they are like the animals. Man's fate is like that of the animals. The same fate awaits them both. As one dies, so dies the other. All have the same breath. Man has no advantage over the animal. Everything is meaningless. All go to the same place. All come from dust, and to dust all return. Who knows if the spirit of man rises upward, and if the spirit of the animal goes down into the earth? So I saw that there is nothing better for a man than to enjoy his work, because that is his lot. For who can bring him to see what will happen after him? Again I looked and saw all the oppression that was taking place under the sun. I saw the tears of the oppressed, and they have no comforter. Power was on the side of their oppressors, and they have no comforter. And I declared that the dead who had already died are happier than the living who are still alive. But better than both is he who has not yet been, or who has not seen the evil that is done under the sun. Such a happy ending. So question 1 asks, describe the teacher's view of time in verses 1 through 8 in chapter 3. So there is a time for everything, a season for everything.
It seems like, to me, that time is a series of counter happenings.
Okay. Counter happenings. It's kind of polar opposites.
Well, they work very well.
The time is cyclical. It's like the seasons, of weather. That you're in summer right now, but just wait and you'll be in winter. And when you're in winter, just wait and you'll be in summer. That nothing lasts forever, and things repeat itself.
Mm.
It's almost like it takes one to appreciate the other, and kind of like how they mirror the two, because they kind of coexist, even though there's a season for one and then the other. I sort of see life as such a mix of both of those extremes in every moment, so kind of the dance of the two.
So it's interesting, again, I like looking at the literary structure because it intrigues me. So there's 2 sets of 7 couplets, and 7 is often the Bible used to represent completeness. So essentially, kind of what Jason was saying, it's representing all human activity under the sun. So it's all the complete activity of all human activity under the sun.
Does anybody else sing that song when you read this? Have the song go up in your head?
Yes.
By the,
Who sang
Oh,
that
by
song?
The
the birds, yes.
Oh.
Yes.
I thought it was Pierre Paul Mary. Probably
I
sang it too.
think the Birds originally did it,
Oh,
but
the
I think
Byrds.
maybe a lot of people did it.
Probably
But,
so.
Yeah, that song is based on Ecclesiastes 1-8. Yeah, they're basically just singing scripture.
In apropos of nothing, but the title of Hemingway's book, The Sun Also Rises, is also from
Oh,
Ecclesiastes.
I didn't know that.
Yes.
A very literary book.
Yeah. Okay, so the next question, question 2. How do you interpret this way of looking at time? Is it despairing or hopeful or both? Explain.
To me, it seems kind of both. To me, it's kind of stoic, and I know stoic is like stoicism is a philosophy, so that's not Christianity, but it's, the attitude that what will be sort of, and we just adjust to it. Only we know why we adjust to it.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's, and this too shall pass. So if you're going through a rough time, it will pass and you'll be in a good time. But when you're in a good time, that also will pass. And so it's just a reminder to not lose hope, but also to be in the moment and enjoy life and the time that you have, and whatever you're going through, because it's not going to be forever.
I sort of missed the beginning of all this, but I'm going to jump in just a little bit.
Yeah, go ahead.
Because I'm looking at my notes, and it makes me think, about time and how we squander it, we waste it. It's like when you're in a hurry, and time just goes zoom. But if you're sitting around, it drags and drags and drags, and I think that's how we waste our time. I look back at my husband's illness and how I could have helped him so much better if I had known more, if I had had the time to sit and dig in the Bible. But I was so busy being a wife and a mother and carpooling and helping my children and taking care of the house and working in the yard, and time just went zoom. It was gone. And then here I am in this place, with my husband. But God works in such an amazing way. I made sure that, my husband had spiritual counseling, and then he was anointed, and I always talked about God, especially, I was like the spiritual leader in the house. But I really didn't know what I know now, and I have so much more to learn. You never stop. And so every day is this wonderful gift that we've been given. And I feel like today I've been spinning my wheels because it was spent with trying to financial stuff with my brother. And so it's just, time is such a precious commodity, and we have to spend it wisely. And the best place to start is here in the morning.
Yeah.
First thing in the morning, because the day gets going and this is gone.
And there's a God-ordained beauty to everything, even in strange ways. God ordains beauty.
What'd you say?
I said there's God-ordained beauty in everything.
Yes.
I think that's what, seeing the positive light, that's how time can be beautiful. And question 3 kind of goes with question 2, so you can also address question 3. It says, what negative and positive things does the teacher say about time in verses 9 through 15, so right after verses 1 through 8. would you all put down for 3?
I think that he describes that there's a burden of, it's a burden of ignorance because we cannot understand God's time. We can't grasp it, timing, what God means by time. And that's a burden for us. And it is, we know we all struggle with not doing things fast enough.
Yes.
And that, like you were just saying, he expressed that, but in God's time, everything is beautiful, everything will be beautiful, and that all of the time that we have is a gift that's given to us.
Can people speak up
Yes.
just a little more, because a couple of us at this end are having trouble
Okay,
hearing.
no problem, we'll speak up.
Sorry.
It's a big room.
Yes, it is. It's a long way from me to you.
Thank you.
What did other people put for question 3? Verses 9 through 15.
But kind of going along with that we can never know the entirety of time, the entirety of the plan of what's going to unfold and happen. We only have a little, tiny little piece. It's like a little, snap and then we're gone. And so it can make things seem meaningless and purposeless and things that are unfair and unjust because we only get this tiny little glimpse of where we are instead of being able to see the whole entirety, not just maybe of the world, but then of time as it stretches out both back and forwards.
But it's kind of like you're always going to have negative things happen in your life. And I mean, it could be just about anything. But you just have to look towards if things are going to get better.
I think we're always looking for change too. We get impatient when things are the same all the time, and you just want change, whether it's right or wrong or whatever. It gets tedious.
Piggyback on what Cindy said, we may be experiencing some trauma or a hard time, and we don't know what's ahead, but if we look back at other hard times and see the blessings that came from that, so he does give us a past, he gives us a snippet of the past and the present, not too much of the future. So, but I think that helps me when I look back and see how I got through it, that I got through it, and the good things that have come.
Yeah, I like the verse. I like verse 11. Verse 11 says, "He has made everything beautiful in His time. He has also set eternity in the hearts of men, yet they cannot fathom what God has done from beginning to end." So in one instance we have, we have eternity in our hearts, because we have Christ Jesus in our hearts. So that's like the most beautiful thing ever, right? But in the same moment, it's like really hard to it's almost impossible to comprehend eternity because we have such a limited mind, and we can't fully understand like eternity. So in that way, it's somewhat frustrating in a way because we have this promise, we can't really fully understand like eternity, the eternal mindset. We have such a time-sensitive brain. Any other thoughts on 2 or 3 before we move on? Okay, so we'll move on to question 4 then. Question 4 asks, how would you live your life differently if you believe God had no control? What consequences of not acknowledging God's authority are taking place in our society today? If you'd rather answer that question.
There's a lot of things, I mean, war, poverty, homelessness. I mean, there's some things that,
Would you live your life differently? Isn't that the question?
Yes, and then the following question is what consequences of not acknowledging God's authority are taking place in our society? So it kind of piggybacks on that question. Basically, the question is, how are people that are not acknowledging God's in control with God's authority, how are they living life right now in today's society? Or maybe in past historical examples.
I'd certainly worry a whole lot more. Not that I don't have worry times, but to be able to lift a burden and turn it over to God, that's priceless.
Yeah, because then you would just be carrying your burden and your worry.
In the consequences part, I was looking at, in James 4:2. And you desire but do not have, so you kill. You covet but you cannot get what you want, so you quarrel and fight. You do not have because you do not ask God. So I think we see a lot of conflict in our society and outside globally.
Yeah, because
As a
everyone's
consequence of
right.
not turning to God, maybe?
And everyone thinking that they're in control.
Right? You covet and right. And you desire for things that you're not going to get. That we read that whole, first section so far. It's been someone seeking something they weren't going to get, right?
I think,
So,
I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
that-
I think I focused on the second part. I focused on God's authority. And so that made me think of accountability on our side to Him. And therefore I thought of words like crime, cruelty, injustice, and just generally sin. I could have probably written down 50 words, but I didn't.
My life would be wild and lost. Without God, we'd have a more chaotic world, and I'd have a lack of focus. I think if you have time to go to Romans 1:18 through 26, it's explained there that God tried and tried, but finally He gave over to mankind's will. And, we're everything that we see today. Evil, corrupt, adulterers, you name it. And I think without God being in control, we would have a more dominance of evil and lack of focus and direction. And if you have time to read and study the Bible, if you follow it from Genesis to Revelation, God doesn't go around with a wristwatch on like we do. We're governed by night and day as far as time, as far as human beings. But it's my understanding when we reach heaven, just God's glory in itself, there's constant light. And we are spirits, not human physical forms. And therefore, time becomes obsolete. And if you look at Genesis to Revelation and all that time frame, you just look at God's promise to Abraham that he would have children. And Sarah's saying, I'm 90 years old. How can that be? What we have to do is we have to truly trust in Jesus. And that's hard for us to do because just like you all were saying earlier, we can wake up in the morning and before our feet hit the floor, which I've been trying to do, is just thank God that He's given me another day and that I'm living under His mercy and grace and to guide me, through that day. But then, if you do like Ann had said last week, that you spend time in God's Word, with a morning devotion and prayer and study. And what I found is, like I said, the dry sponge effect, I just keep going and going and going because I can't get enough. Because when I read the Bible, I find focus. I'm sorry to take time, but I find direction. I find truth because I have been deceived. I've been lied to in life, and I don't think anybody, wants to be lied or deceived in life. And so I find answers in the Bible. It wasn't until my third study of Romans, I always, when I would read the Bible, it would be like pulling a chain to turn a light on. And when, I guess the third go around of Romans, one word, illuminate. And that's what the Bible does for me. It illuminates things for me.
Thank you, Steve.
You should be at the breakfast table when he says grace. I'm sorry.
I saw you looking at him. That was a very positive.
sorry.
That was a very positive look. I'm sorry.
It can be a 5-minute grace, I'm telling you. I'm sorry, that's not very nice.
It wasn't very nice.
It was.
It's fine.
He's used to
Wait,
it.
I can't-
Tomorrow it's gonna be 10.
I just
44
think,
years I've done with him. Anyway,
I think somebody mentioned earlier, that we're learning, but I think when we go, to heaven, we're really gonna learn.
Oh, yeah.
And these answers that, you have, it'll all be shown to us and we'll be comforted, we'll be at peace, and we'll understand. But we need that assurance.
Yeah, of course.
okay.
And honestly, with these Bible studies, I know and I appreciate the Bible so much. I like my notes a lot too. But everybody's perspective just adds so much to it. I mean, just to do this on my own, I don't even know if it'd be 1/10 the value as it is when everybody's sharing their history, their perspective, their experiences. And you say, okay, I can relate to that or I can't, but whatever. But all that kind of gets incorporated in your mind and your heart, and it's like a synergy. It's just amazing. So somebody figured this out before me, obviously. Been doing this a long time.
Yeah, I think this might be part of the answer to the theodicy question of, how can evil exist if we serve and worship a perfectly loving and all-powerful and all-controlling God? Well, part of it is because we simply have free will and we choose to be the ones in control. I mean, that's part of the answer, not that there is an answer for every single situation. But a lot of what we see going on in the world today, as far as evil and sin and suffering, I mean, just think of what's going on in the Ukraine. I mean, that's a consequence of people making some really awful choices. And here comes evil and suffering and pain and death and dying, and it's because we have free will and we're choosing to, but we want to be in control so much. And even like on a less dramatic note, I mean, we really have a hard time relinquishing control in life, because it's that pride, you know, the saying, pride cometh before the fall. So yeah.
I'll just share, in our family, we have a little saying, because we talk about, when Adam ate the apple, and it's been apples for everyone ever since. So we have a little gig we gig when we see something, and we'll say apples for everyone.
Oh, I like that. I might use that. Anyone else with 4 before we move on to question 5? Okay, so we'll move on to 5. 5 asks, how does God's sovereign control of time and eternity bring meaning to this life?
I have a question about sovereign control, using that term, because when I hear sovereign, I go to like Calvinism.
Yeah.
And thinking of like predestination, so like that God has written out a plan so that every little thing that we do is sort of predestined that we're going to do it, and that just takes away the idea of free will. So I mean, maybe you can't tell me this, but how are they using that term? And this is really not, I guess, have to do with answering the question, but I was just kind of curious about how these folks are using that term.
I think more how they're using the term is, how is God's, more like how God is all powerful and all knowing and all loving is kind of how I interpret that term. Not that he's predestined us to a certain way of life, or predestined us to do one thing, but more that he's all powerful, all knowing, all loving. Because in the Methodist faith tradition, we are not Calvinistic, so that means we don't believe in predestination. So we believe that God has given us free will. So he's given us a brain, and we're going to use that brain in relation to our faith, and that we are going to make choices because we have free will. So it's not like we are puppets and God is the masterful puppeteer who's simply just, controlling us in that sense, but that he's made us free creatures, and he's given us a brain, and we're to use it, and we have reason, and we have an option.
One of the Bible studies that I attended, and I don't remember which one, but it talked about, all right, if God didn't predestine, if he doesn't have the plan for our life, look at it as if he's writing a story. We're writing a story, and he wants us to move with him as we're writing our story.
I heard, someone put it this way, that so there's a plan for us, but we have free will, so we can choose to ignore that plan. But then we can always get back on it. And he used the example of like a GPS. So if you're going down and you just decide to make a right-hand turn, and all of a sudden you're not going in the direction you're supposed to go, then the GPS is just going to reroute you. And then you have the choice to kind of follow that and be rerouted and get back onto that.
Or
Right.
keep on
Yeah,
ignoring
which I
it.
thought was
And I used to use that, Gil Smith,
Yes.
Silver, he talked about using a GPS, and he'd hear a voice, interrupt, redirect, interrupt. And honestly, that was when I was going through a hard time with a teenage daughter. I would be out walking early in the morning praying, and all of a sudden I'd start, oh, sorry, interrupt, redirect. And I have to get my mind going in another path. So it's not just moving on that, it's thinking in another way.
Yeah. Well, I can relate to that. I mean, that was basically my call to ministry. God called me into ministry when I was in college, and I proceeded to ignore him for 3 years. So I was redirecting. But what did you just say? what was that little phrase?
Oh, like rerouting.
Rerouting, yeah, so I ignored him, but eventually 3 years later came back. So, you know, I had the choice to either say yes or no. I said no at first and then said yes.
We're glad you did.
I am too.
Oh, yeah.
So yeah, that's how I would interpret that term, but hopefully that's helpful. It's not in a Calvinistic manner. So does anyone have any contributions to 5?
Well, I mean, I think that, because you know, somebody asked me last night, like, what do you think of the future? And I was like, well, short term, I'm very pessimistic, but long term, I'm optimistic. And you know, I've heard some other people kind of use a similar language, because in the short term, things are kind of a mess, but in the long term, you know, things, you know, God has a way of bringing things back together, and kind of rerouting or kind of I don't know what quite the word is, but kind of restarting maybe. And if you kind of look at Revelation, like it's really kind of this big pattern that you see that's played out over and over again of how things just kind of get redirected and brought back into this new Jerusalem and this new earth, and things are brought back together. And so that's kind of how, to me, that there's meaning, that in the long term, things get brought back together and brought back together in a plan that's what God is trying to do.
Or that things are resurrected
Yeah.
in a new way.
Yeah.
And he's talking about time, he's so patient, he's so patient. I'm one of the most impatient people I've ever known. And I know I keep referring to this, and I may have mentioned it last week, but after my husband passed away, I was going to get back to my art because I missed it so much. And as hard as I tried, I would start. I couldn't do anything. Every time I tried. I was going to travel with my brother and sister-in-law, and they died in a boating accident, but I kept trying to get back to that art, but that's not what God wanted me to do. And my daughter, who is extremely faithful, she kept saying, Mom, because I had started to read the Bible, and she said, you need to get into a Bible study group. And I said, I don't have time for that. And so I got into a Bible study group with Leslie Marsh, and I just remember before going into that, the first book in the Bible that I read, and it was just by chance, I opened up to Acts. Mm-hmm. And the Apostle Paul lit a fire under me. And that's how God uses his holy word. And I was rerouted. I like that word. I was rerouted, and I started that Bible study. And I would spend a good 4 hours. And it's only because I can. There's no one in the house but me. So don't put any gold stars here. I had that, God gave me the time, and he sat me down, and once I read Acts, I started at the front, and actually I think the first Bible study I took with Leslie was in Genesis. And
we did so many, I can't keep them all straight.
Oh, we did.
Over 90% with Beth Moore.
Yeah, and it was a good way to start. And just flew through the Bible, and just to, and when you read something now, you remember that story. Mm-hmm. And God doesn't give you the meaning all at once. Mm-hmm. I will read something, and it's just like you said, you were reading Romans, and all of a sudden, you could have read it 1,000,000 times, and all of a sudden, that's what he meant. That's it. And so, it's so amazing looking over my shoulder what God has done so far.
Yeah, we need to be spiritually receptive.
Yes, you need to be open for sure. And, I'm looking forward to what he has to say.
I am too. That is God ordained beauty in everything. So I'm gonna pause right here, and I wrote something on the board. I know my handwriting is a little small, so I apologize. But I wanted to go over this because we're kind of at a good stopping point here to go over the structure of what we've studied so far. So this is the structure of Ecclesiastes 1, verse 1 through 3:15. So in 1 verse 2, we have a problem stated, life taken at face value is meaningless, all right? So, and then in chapter 1, verse 3 through 1 verse 16, we have potential solutions investigated by the teacher. So what he discovers, what is needed is more wisdom and knowledge, all right? So then he goes on to explore this more and finds out wisdom and knowledge are meaningless. And then starting in chapter 2, he explores something different. What is needed are more experiences. And then he finds out shortly after experience is meaningless. And then we take a turning point in chapter 2, verse 24, all the way through chapter 3 through 15, which we just studied. Here there's an entirely different worldview. And so the first part of Ecclesiastes, we just hear about human activity, right? We have this human perspective. But now in chapter 2, verse 24, he mentions God, right? So we have a different worldview now. We don't have just the human perspective, but we have from God's perspective. So just in verse 24, God's mentioned 3 times. So we have a clear shift there in the book, all the way through 3:15. So just want to go over the structure. Just give a quick refresher where we're at. So starting in chapter 3, verse 16, the question is, what observations does the teacher make in chapter 3, verse 16 and chapter 4, verses 1 through 3 about human wickedness?
That wickedness often exists where righteousness should be, and that too often people who are sort of the victims of that wickedness and that oppression, that there are people there to comfort them and help them and support them.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if you remember one of our first sessions, I warned you guys that the teacher, Kohelet, kind of has an ADHD brain, like he's all over the place. And this is a prime example of how he's all over the place. So we've just finished talking about, God has set eternity in our hearts. Really, he's going from a God perspective back to a human perspective. So starting in verse 16, he says, "And I saw something else under the sun. In the place of judgment, wickedness was there. In the place of justice, wickedness was there." So when he's talking about place of judgment, place of justice, he's talking about the court system. So he's seeing there that there really isn't justice being served, that evil is still conquering and still having the say. So here, now he's saying it seems like he's saying that human wickedness is in control and God's not in control. And same with chapter 4, verses 1 through 3, he's saying, I saw the tears of the oppressed and they have no comforter, powers on the side of the oppressor. So again, we see human wickedness being in control versus God being